Another common sense thing that really bothers me with the overtreatment, especially with amphetamines, is chronic long-term neurotoxicity. I've heard so many people so confidently state, and by people, I mean researchers, scientists, people in my position, so confidently assert that there's no evidence of long-term damage from, daily amphetamine for years and years. Well, that's absolutely not true. But on a common sense level, why wouldn't that be true to some extent? You've got methamphetamine, which works the same as amphetamines to a more potent degree. And have you seen the pictures of people who use methamphetamine daily? It's a drastically different person. They develop all kinds of different medical problems
Hmm.
because that drug floods their brain with these chemicals and it creates toxicity by all of the hyperexcitation. So amphetamines undoubtedly are not going to do that to the same degree, but why wouldn't they do it to some degree? We know that amphetamines can cause toxicity when those molecules, because there's so many of them, start spilling out of that tightly controlled synapse. They wash over different areas of other neurons and they create an inflammatory response there. So, this assertion that, well, there's no evidence of long term toxicity, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion is that there's not any really good long term studies on people using amphetamines for 40 years. You
Yeah.
can't just say there's no evidence of it without clarifying that there's not any really great studies on the
Yeah.
long term.
Well, because
Um,
you can't fund a study like that. Who's going to
and
fund
who's going to fund it?
it?
Now, what's supposed to happen is the companies that make the drugs are supposed to follow their drugs for 20, 25 years, but it's all up to them. And the
Yeah.
only thing they stand to do by finding more problems with their drug, whether it's, Adderall been off brand for a long time, been generic, whether it's Makena in the OBGYN world or Vioxx or Oxycontin. I mean, this story is told over and over again. It speaks to a larger problem with our regulatory agencies and their lack of forcing or taking ownership over those stage 4 clinical trials to see what the impact is in the long term.
Yeah.
They got all kinds of little tricks and trades to kick the can down the road on some of these stage 4 clinical trials, but they have nothing to benefit from it. So why do we put that in their hands? Shouldn't the NIH actually be doing that work independently of the company that makes the drug?
Yeah, and I think the NIH or the NIMH have done certain things that I list in my book where they used to question things or, directors would walk away and say, "Hey, I no longer believe that this is good practice," and things like that. But nowadays, it's almost like, "Wait a minute, but what is your job?" Right? It's almost like Chad is more powerful than the NIMH. Like, wait, what do you mean? Like they're just an advocacy group. Yeah, but they have all these important experts sitting on their board and they get funding and so again, it's where's the money coming from? It's coming from the pharmaceutical companies. They're not going to go fund studies for the NIH to do a 40-year research project or study on the
Well, and
negative
they're
effects.
funding the NIH.
Well, yeah, there we go, right? So
That's the problem because the NIH knows, well, if we don't ride this line of appeasing them, then we're going to
yeah,
lose X amount of funding.
to me, it was also evident, and it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on in regards to the COVID vaccine, but it was so clear to me that hey, here's this medication, right, that we're going to unleash, and we have zero studies into the future of the effects of it. And we're just going to blanket it like one size fits all, and we're just going to call it an emergency, and here we go. And understandable that in an emergency, you would just sort of pull out whatever you have. But now that we're, what, 5 years later, we're not acknowledging any of the side effects and any of the damages that it's caused. That's not good practice.
We're not only doing that, you hear all over the news how, I'm a bad parent because I'm not vaccinating my 6-month-old with the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
Again, look around the world. This is not a global recommendation, not even close. Are there
Yeah.
other countries that do recommend it at a young age? Yes. They are not the majority. They're not even close to the majority.
Yeah.
And that was a big wake up call for me. When it happened, I was in my residency training and I predicted so many things that were going to come from that that turned out to be true. They came out and said, "We've got this vaccine. It's 100% effective." I said, "Bullshit. How do you know it's 100% effective right now? There's
Yeah.
no way." And my mother was a pharmacist, and she probably taught me the most basic and important principle that I carry with me to this day. She said, "You don't know what the effects of any intervention are until you're 10 or 15 years down the road when it comes to medications.
Yeah.
You do not know the long term effects. Not everything is going to pop up immediately." So as the months dragged on and we created a vaccine for a respiratory RNA virus, that virology 101, you're told that these viruses mutate rapidly to become more transmissible and less deadly. AKA, why did we need a vaccine in the first place? But nobody talked about that. And then you see the months wane on and you see, oh, it's 90% effective. Oh, it's 80%. Oh, it's 70%. So I never bought that crap. And I tell you,
Same
looking
here.
back, I knew what was going to happen. I could have been one of these congresspersons who invested heavily in Pfizer and
Yeah.
retired early.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. And I would be very angry looking back. I didn't get vaccinated, neither did my ex and our kids. We did not vaccinate them for the COVID vaccine. And we're not anti-vaxxers. We've had vaccines before and probably too many, but we're okay, knock on wood, so far. But same thing. I was thinking to myself, look, we're not going to vaccinate, and that's just a risk we're taking. Just like we put our kids in a child-led school back then, no homework, no grades. They'll catch up. We trust our intuition. And guess what? All their friends that were vaccinated, including my friends, all got COVID, all got sick multiple times. Meanwhile, my kids rarely get sick. Even to this day, I don't think I've ever heard the word like, I'm sick, I need to stay home from school, like in the last 3 or 4 years. Never. It's just like, oh, I have a little sore throat, or maybe I have a little thing, and we do some honey and vitamin C and zinc and tea, and knock on wood, they're fortunate. But at the same time, you go, well, if their friends who got vaccinated are constantly sick with colds and flus and they're not, something's up. Their immune system is leaning on something, whereas my kid's immune system is riding on natural immunity. I mean, can't
Yeah,
explain it
yeah,
any
yeah.
other.
It's a very common sense approach to it. And when you think about it, because I do think that there's evidence that the COVID vaccine does probably have benefit in the at-risk populations. And one of the reasons
Yeah,
why they are spared from so many of these immune system side effects is because they already have an immune system that is weak, right? As we get older, as we accumulate problems, our immune system is weaker. We're we likely benefit from having something stimulating it to respond to something quickly. But when you're talking about doing that for the general young adult population, their immune systems are strong. And
yeah, yeah,
COVID is a little bit unique in the fact that the infection itself was not the problem. That is not what was harming us. It
yeah,
was our immune response to the infection and our systems becoming overwhelmed based on an immune response that wouldn't quit. So that population was not dying and didn't need that vaccine. But again, I think it's clear to you and I why it was sold as this, miracle intervention. But
yeah,
again, today it drives me absolutely nuts listening to mainstream media and both sides. I'm not talking about the left media. I'm talking about right media too. None of them ever want to talk about what are other peer countries of us doing with this intervention or with vaccines in general. Like,
yeah,
if you really want to make the best and most comprehensively evaluative decision on vaccinating your kids, I've got a 2 and a 3-year old, and that's tough because I don't want to not vaccinate against something like rubella that can cause really, really severe downstream effects with the native infection. But if you really want to make a comprehensive decision there, look at what other countries are doing that are
Yeah,
respected internationally for keeping their population healthy, the ones that have high life expectancies, not like
right.
we have here in the US.
Yeah, you could probably look at all the Scandinavian countries, including Sweden during COVID. What happened to that? They're fine. I mean, yes, they had their deaths and they had their things happening, but I agree with you. It's almost like look at other countries where the educational system's even better, right? And there's less deaths and obesity and all that stuff. And then look at how many vaccines they give their kids. Probably a third, I would just guess, or maybe it's two-thirds, or who knows what. But we're just like, same with medications for ADHD and depression. We just like keep selling it and selling it and selling it and adding one and adding one. We're all going to be so medicated by the time,
And then you, again, you get labeled as you're anti-vax everything. You
right.
like RFK, and don't get me wrong, I don't agree with everything RFK thinks. I think he oversteps his bounds fairly regularly, but he also doesn't get any credit for the things that he's doing that I think are positive. I
Yeah.
heard on NPR the other day, they were saying it's dangerous what he's trying to do with direct to consumer advertising. He's trying to restrict it back to pre 1997 when this loophole came into existence where they could send people to a toll free phone number to a website. And therefore, the regulation that says they have to list every side effect, now they could do that on TV because they could take all those negative effects and just put a little blurb at the bottom or
Yeah.
put a website or put a phone number. And that absolutely opened the floodgates for consumers to receive information about things like ADHD, for consumers to receive direct information where you have this individual and they're so happy and they're smiling and they're bouncing on a ball or they're at their grandkids' baseball game cheering and laughing. And it's not an appropriate representation of what the effects of that drug are. And it's just an extremely dangerous. So, anyway, he's not getting any credit for that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he's not getting credit for saying, hey, maybe we should take some things out of our food. Maybe we should have a little bit different food pyramid and diet. What I hear is he's got a worm in his brain and he's anti vax.
Right. Right. They're shooting the messenger, right? But what's the message? And the message isn't going to be perfect. It's not going to please everyone, but can we agree to certain, like you said, benefits or changes that are beneficial without saying, oh, yeah, but he's on the right. Yeah, but he's this, he's that. So what? I don't care. But he wants to make the food healthier, right? It's similar to what we're going through, right? It's like like you said, we don't know the truth. I don't know the truth about ADHD. I have people attacking me, oh, this is all nonsense, and if you say it, over and over again, you believe it's the truth. It's like, well, no, but there's a logic in usually what I say, and the more I say it, the more I go. For example, I wanted to say this earlier, is when we give kids like 5 or 6 year olds these amphetamines or these strong, highly addictive drugs, we're giving it to them while the brain is still developing. That's neuroscience 101. So how come we're doing that? How come we're like what's the word? Intercepting or
Intersecting.
yeah, these developing brains with these strong drugs when we have no long-term studies, like you said, what the effect could be on a child once they hit like 30, 40 years old, right? We don't have that. So, but why are we doing it? It's not an emergency. That's to me, that's a logic that if you suddenly go like, yeah, but you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a psychiatrist and it's not, you don't have the right studies. It's like, no, but that's logic. Like that's not even, why are we doing this?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. That is a huge crucial point that it is not an emergency, but it's presented as one.
Yeah.
And to go back to what I've heard probably 3 or 4 times in the last few months, running into traffic, we're going to create an emergency that doesn't exist.
You're right. It's a talking point because I've heard it before. And I always say, like, yeah, well, of course, you're not going to want to. The kids do that don't have quote unquote ADHD. That's yeah, they're running after the ball. They're so happy playing their sports. Yes, you got to watch out for that, right? But is that what's meant by impulsivity? That's danger. That's a reckless kind of danger impulsive thing that as a parent, yeah, you want to be there for. But those are not the ones we're talking about. There's hundreds of other scenarios that we call impulsive that, hey, they're kids. They're excited.
Right. They're supposed to be excited. There's one other thing I wanted to show you.
I love
Try
your
to get
graphs, by the way.
graph.
I've been using ChatGPT effectively by creating graphics for me with existing studies. It helps me, right? Because I'm a visual person. I recently did one on the supposed academic benefits of ADHD medication, and after year two, it starts to taper off and it's gone by year five. You know, it's like,
This is the worldwide daily dose
mhm.
of ADHD treatment, 1.19. And again, the units don't matter because we're comparing here. United States 107.15, and this is 2019. It's only gotten worse since COVID. I'd like
Yeah.
to see the updated numbers here, but my point is look at what we're doing compared to the world. Now, again, the world may be undertreating to a degree, but if you think that we're not overtreating, I mean, it is absolutely absurd how much we're prescribing these medications.
100 times
So,
more. Yeah. Yeah. You can't argue that. It's funny. I have this graphic. It's a graphic that when we created a pitch packet for the documentary, we just, at the time, my ex-wife and I, we played around with these, banners, kind of cool things that you would see. And you're like, oh, that's kind of cool about ADHD. And so we did this, it was this idea of like, what if we took our title and we actually, that no one can deny, I think. Is it over? No, but is it overdiagnosed? Yeah, probably. You
I
know?
mean, you say that, but I feel like I can just hear people saying, no, it's actually underdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Because again, if you're diagnosed with ADHD, well, you want to feel more part of the group. So the more people that get diagnosed with ADHD,
Yes.
that's your tribe, that's your crew, your group.
I get so wound up about it, and I write about this in my book. This idea of belonging to this tribe that's broken, and that finally, how people say, "Oh," and look, there's some truth to it. But when people say, "Oh, now I know what's wrong with me," well, what's wrong with that statement is you're looking for something that's wrong with you, and just because you now have a name for it, you feel justified that you're not like holy, you're not fully functioning adult. And so now in that group, you can't question anything. If I go into Reddit groups, I get shredded in 5 seconds. It is literally like I don't go in there anymore. I wait until I see a post that's kind of in our camp, and there's been a few recently, but I learned my lesson to comment on the insider comments and to go like, "Hey, what about da 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 da?" And I just get bombarded, like destroyed. And I go, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to argue with
It's
that.
like when you bring up an issue in a public group of people, and at least for me, like I'm constantly trying to figure out, whether it's the government or whether it's these big events like the recent assassination. I want to talk to other critically thinking, intelligent people about what they think about the event and the news around it and what is
Yeah.
true and what's not. But sometimes the minute you bring it up, you get so shut down and you realize that this person made up their mind before they saw any evidence to the contrary, and
Yeah.
they're not even willing to entertain or engage the other side. I certainly don't want to get into the Charlie Kirk stuff, but I think what that is really emphasizing in our American society is we're really pretty fucked up when it comes to arguing with each other.
Yeah.
We don't know how to do it. We don't know how to be respectful or how to simmer in silence, right? People say certain things that I think are just absolutely ridiculous and stupid, but I've got to be able to simmer in silence and let them finish their point. If I don't listen to them, then I will never move off of the opinions that I have and I won't grow in my understanding of things. If
Yeah.
I can't consider what somebody is saying, that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem within the ADHD debate because people get so attached to that label.
Yeah. You bring up, there's so much good stuff here. That's why I love our conversation. It's so refreshing to have this because this is what we got to have. And, we're in the same camp, but still, I mean, rarely can I have this kind of discussion with somebody this calm from the other camp, right? And what happened during this whole Charlie Kirk, thing, what I realized is that what we're not looking at is like, for example, the shooter, right? At some point, I read somewhere that, his dad turned him in and, want to do the right thing. And I go, okay, that's great. Now, let's interview the parents because what's going on in this family unit that you've produced this young adult that acts that way? There are massive, massive issues there that we need to talk about because we can't just move. And I almost, at some point, I wanted to do a documentary on interviewing the parents of mass shooters. Now, that would be hard to do, and they probably, would they want to do it? Would they be honest? But if we could, we would discover, like, I'm kind of pointing to what you were saying is like, we don't know, we're not raised by role models who know how to like show us how you have healthy relationships and healthy debates and conversations and how you forgive and take responsibility and be accountable, right? Because I'm myself, I'm going through a breakup right now, and breakups suck. But what I'm learning is that in a relationship, there's so many moments when you have to be accountable or responsible. And there's things that my ex said on the phone that were very angry, and I listened, and I knew that not everything that was being said is the truth or applies to me, but there were definitely nuggets that I was like, let me sit with that. Let me sit with that. Like you said, I sat with it in silence for 2 weeks, and I realized she has some valid points. And that's what we need in this world. I'm using that as a metaphor. We're so quick to react. Like you read something, you hit already like comment, return, gone, fuck you. It's over, right? And so it creates this vacuum of dissonance. Is that the right dissonance? Voices, right? And no one ever sits with anything and says, maybe is there something I can take responsibility for? Is that quality I hate about Trump is maybe a micro bit of that in me, Have I maybe cheated on my taxes, or have I been a bit of a womanizer or whatever? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or Biden. Like, can we just stop and see, but to your point, we've created a society where that we don't have time for that. We got to go. We got to be righteous, right? No time for
And
love.
it's easier just to, set up camp on one side or the other and just say, I'm done with it. I don't want to listen any. And again, I mean, we have limited time, energy, and effort.
Yeah.
You and I can't figure out, all the intricacies of what happened to JFK, right? We've
Right.
been trying to
Right.
figure that out for decades now. We don't have the time to do that, but I think it's a dangerous jump to, because you don't have the time, to then adamantly agree with one side or the other just because it's easy. I feel much
Yeah.
more comfortable when somebody says, you know what? I don't know about that question that you're asking me because I haven't had time, energy, or effort or willingness to investigate.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everybody feels like they've got to set up camp somewhere. But on so many issues, we could just be nomads. We don't need to have input on everything.
Yeah. And I think it's much more beneficial, just like in my case, like sometimes I don't know. But also, I've learned that in my podcast and my movement, I'm not interested in doing, you know, my scientist is bigger than your scientist, or my study is better than your study. That never ends well. And also, there's no end. There's no judgment. There's no panel that says, you, Roman, are now right and Dr. Russell Barkley is wrong, or vice versa. It doesn't work that way. I've learned that I'm going to go with resonance. Like whoever resonates with what I say or my podcast, they will be the people that listen and can benefit from it. And I do the same with experts. If I don't like their attitude, like the first time I listened and saw a video of Russell Barkley, I was like, I don't like this guy's energy. I just don't like it. He's angry. And then I found out later that his brother died in a car crash because he was untreated ADHD, didn't wear a seatbelt. So he's kind of on a crusade. It's really personal to him. And then I was like, oh, that's the anger. That's why he's angry at people who, in his eyes, ignore ADHD. I get that. But the energy is not the energy that I'm attracted to. And I wouldn't listen to an expert like that because he's driven by something other than like being open minded and having a constructive dialogue around this thing with parents, right? He's like, I'm science, like Fauci. Don't question me. Medications work. I'm the expert, and you don't know shit. that's how he shows up. And I'm like, yep, not my kind of guy.
I think that's so harmful. And that's unfortunately very pervasive in medicine in general, because you have a lot of narcissists or people with narcissistic traits. I would openly admit that I have some of that. I think what I think is right. Now, I realize that it may not be right, but from my perception, it's more right than what you think. Not you necessarily, but you in general.
Yeah.
What we have to have in society, but specifically in medicine, we have to have competing theories sitting at tables debating each other
Yeah.
openly and honestly in a public forum, or if it's not even a public forum, in a forum that is open to training and existent doctors and providers. Like, why does that not happen? That's one of the overarching questions that makes me think we don't care about true academic or medical progress. We just care about profit, because if you did, then you would let all of the vaccine experts on both sides sit
Yes.
across from each other and one by one, vaccine by vaccine, debate what their interpretation of what the science says, and then
Yeah.
let people come to their conclusions based on what you're saying. But we don't allow for that, whether it's
No.
medicine or societally. I mean, you just saw obviously somebody is spouting their beliefs, and for all I know, that was his belief, and he gets, assassinated. It's such a huge problem. It's such a massive problem in medicine, but more generally, our society is broken in that sense. We've got to sit
Yeah.
across and be able to disagree and simmer in silence.
I agree. And that might not be the next immediate step, but I wonder, I've been meaning to ask people that I trust and that I resonate with, could we create a sort of, to use your title, renegade mental health conference event, something where, and I know there's some things exist. I did some research, but it's very slim picking. I know there's one called the Freedom something coming up in October with Mickey Willis, and there's a bunch of doctors, but it's kind of more, a little bit more on the right, meaning I'm fine with that, but I don't want it to be right or left. I want it to be just people who are questioning the system for the benefit of getting more information, getting deeper, getting just better science or more, inclusive science, right? I would be totally down to collaborate on something and create it probably would start small at the beginning with 10 speakers and, 300 people, but something I would go to that every year. I would love that. And maybe you know of something, I don't know, maybe you go to events or
I don't, but having somewhere where what I'm thinking based on what you said is it would really emphasize open debate on topics that are
yeah,
controversial and allow people from both sides to sit at the same table and pepper in to be open to shifting your opinion, not changing. People think shifting your opinion means going right to left, left to right, yes to no, but just appreciating more nuance, right? Russell Barkley's story, I didn't know that.
I
It
had to
certainly
research it.
changes my perception of his intentions around what he's saying. And there may be some truth to that. There may be some legitimacy. We won't know whether
Yeah,
or not,
yeah,
his brother's death was related to ADHD or not. You can't go back and live both lives simultaneously and do that experiment the most optimal
exactly.
way. But yeah, that changes my opinion on why he's on his crusade.
Yeah, why
Um,
the intensity, right?
when you talked about the conference, there's a couple of folks. I had one on the podcast recently, Matt Bernstein, who
Mm.
has really dove in the last 5 to 10 years into metabolic psychiatry and what I alluded to earlier, high sugar, high carb diets, creating cycles of inflammation that are likely playing a role in the prevalence of our mental health conditions. I don't think it's just overdiagnosis. I think that's a major component of why our rates of diagnoses are so much higher. But I also think lifestyle plays a factor in that, and
Yeah,
diet and lack of exercise play a major factor in driving inflammation. But he
yeah,
said something that I think gets lost in any medical debate. It's not necessarily so important to have the most data backing your intervention. Some interventions are not likely to have that much data.
Yeah.
or have randomized controlled trials if nobody is there to pay for them. He said, you don't have to have all this data on effectiveness or that guarantees that this treatment will be effective when the risk of your treatment is so low. So you've got a 7-year old who's being diagnosed with ADHD, who's being recommended treatment with likely stimulant medications. And wouldn't it be reasonable for a non emergency to maybe try 3 months of it doesn't even have to be a strict ketogenic diet, but just 3 months of saying, you know what? Let's really, really pay attention to what we're putting in the home in terms of food. And we'll
Yeah.
make that really low sugar and we'll kind of let go of things that happen outside of the home. He's with his friends and they, have a soda or a candy bar. Like, I'm not going to try to restrict that, but we're going to reduce what they're getting at home.
Yeah.
And maybe it won't work, but it's not an emergency and there's no real risk to that.
Yeah, exactly. That I remember when our son was diagnosed, we went to a doctor in Malibu or somewhere, and it really left an impression on me because I remember her saying something about like brain inflammation and you got to cut out gluten. That's all I remember. And we did. Now, did it make a difference? Like I said, yes, everything seemed to have made a difference, but we don't know. We tried it. We're like, that's easy, right? We don't have to take meds. We just do that. And then we changed schools. And so suddenly he was calmer. So it was less stress, better nutrition, better meaning you might say, well, there's enough signs that gluten isn't really bad and blah, blah, blah. So what? It worked, right? These are two things that, sure, changing schools can be pricey or complex, but what's the risk? I mean, it really wasn't much risk, right? There was no science. I mean, the doctor could have argued that and said we did brain scans and whatever, but we tried it and it was like, yeah, try all of it. Try as much as you can. Neurofeedback, try behavioral therapy, group, what do they call it? Social interaction classes and sports. And, I found out that supposedly the best for ADHD is hand-eye coordination sports like tennis, ping pong, because two things
Yeah.
have to line up kind of
You
thing.
you have to remain attentive and focused when you're
Yeah.
playing basketball or ping pong or
Swimming, you could be like droning off, right? But so then, we did that. He was really great at ping pong. He got super into it and went to tournaments and stuff. And then he was done with that. It's like, okay. So yeah, like what's the risk?
it's
Right.
why I'm such an advocate for supplemental or nutritional doses of lithium. Talk about something that drives down inflammation. I don't know if you saw the article that came out of Harvard, very well done research. I put out a podcast actually just a couple of weeks ago. I would encourage you to listen to it because talk about something that has a bunch of potential benefit and no real risk or very, very minimal theoretical risk. It really, I think, saved my career as a psychiatrist.
Wow.
High benefit, low risk, natural treatments, if they work, tend to be lower risk, using things like lavender extract for anxiety, which is used throughout Europe, but it's not available by prescription here. Things like lithium, magnesium supplementation, things that I know are not going to harm somebody
Yeah.
as the first interventions. Instead of, for example, giving them a SSRI antidepressant that might make them manic, might make them psychotic, or might make them kill themselves. Like, what?
Yeah. I
So,
mean, hello.
yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah, yeah.
we tried even with our son, we gave him coffee at times. I think he was probably then 11 or I don't know. We read about a study in Colombia that they would give kids a little bit of coffee. And again, the ADHD rate there is low. We're like, okay, well, let's try it. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And then I was doing more research. I'm like, yeah, there's not a huge risk, but let's not do that. And then he stopped. And, but there's so much stuff available, right? If we
Yeah,
do a little bit of research. But
yeah,
that's great that
absolutely.
I acknowledge you for being somebody who presents these alternatives so parents have something available that you're not just some Joe Schmo saying, "Oh, you should try this pill."
My
So,
job is not to tell people what to do. My job is to present information, not do things that I'm not comfortable with, and not force people down one road of treatment. There's a lot of
yeah,
different options for a lot of different things that we call disorders. and they're all very individualized. I mean, there are no studies on the individual sitting in front of me. They're unique
Exactly.
every single time.
Yeah.
So I can use the studies as a marker of what is likely to work or not work, or that is likely to cause a side effect or not. But at the end of the day, every intervention that I recommend is to an individual.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's
hey,
great.
I've got to go. I got to go pick up my kids.
Yeah, it's time. We talked a good amount. It was a great
I know.
conversation. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for informational purposes only. The information provided in this podcast and related materials are meant only to educate. This information is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice. While I am a medical doctor and many of my guests have extensive medical training and experience, nothing stated in this podcast nor materials related to this podcast, including recommended websites, texts, graphics, images, or any other materials, should be treated as a substitute for professional, medical, or psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All listeners should consult with a medical professional, licensed mental health provider, or other healthcare provider if seeking medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Or, put more simply,
If you need help like this guy, call your own doctor.
thanks again for watching and or listening. If you're passionate about the subjects that I discuss on the channel, do me a favor and like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to make your voice heard, that these are problems that must be addressed in our society. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I want to hear them. Feel free to reach out on social media or email us at renegadepsych@gmail.com. And if you'd like to be a guest of the show, or you have a connection to somebody that you think would be a good guest, let us know. Thanks again for listening.